everybody, and welcome. Welcome to today's session where I am joined by one of our super coaches, one of our strategic coaches here at Centered Excellence. That is the beautiful Kate. Kate, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Amazing. And Kate is joining us because we have a subject that I know a lot of recruitment businesses get stuck around. This is all about how to get the best out of your team and how to maximize placements. And this is all through controlling the process and asking the right questions. And I know that this is very prevalent in the world of recruitment, particularly in the markets that we're in right now. And also, I was just talking to one of our clients this morning, and they were saying about how they had a situation with offers that haven't been accepted by candidates because maybe they changed their minds at the last minute or something came up in the process. And that's the thing about this, isn't it, Kate? I mean, we're both from recruitment backgrounds, so we know this is a sort of classic day-to-day situation that occurs, doesn't it, in every team, in every business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Kate, a little bit of background on yourself first, please, if you would, for our listeners, and then we're going to dive into today's session.
Well, it's lovely to be here, everybody. I'm Kate, so I am one of the strategy coaches at Centered Excellence. I've been in recruitment a very, very, very long time. 23 years maybe, and I started off, as many of us do, in a big recruitment business, worked my way up there, loved it. Yeah, was a top biller there, and then managed a team, and then went and set up my own recruitment business about 14 years ago, which I ran for 14, well, it must have been 15 years ago, 14 years. And then I joined the Centered Excellence team about 4 years ago, and now I help lovely clients, help them grow their businesses.
Amazing. Thank you very much. That is great, Kate. So we're going to dive into this subject in a second. And I just want to let you know that if you hold out to the end of this call, we actually have got a giveaway for you, which is going to be a cheat sheet on exactly the right questions and control process that you need to put into place with your team, with your people, to ensure that you do get 100%. So there's no offers that ever get turned down. Anyway, before we give you that, let's dive into it, Kate. So let's just talk about, first of all, why is this so prevalent? Why is this so important for any recruitment business owner right now to be aware of?
I think at the moment we're in sort of quite challenging times, and it's we're hearing a lot that it's more challenging than ever to win those kind of candidates and clients. So it makes absolute sense that we need to maximise and make the most of anything we've got. So there's lots of reasons that can impact results. That's a whole other, there's a number of reasons, that's the whole of the topic. However, there are some really simple tweaks, I believe, that can be made that will 100% have an impact on your results. And these things, the really great thing is, it doesn't cost you anything. You don't need a new IT system. You don't need a big new team. It's all to do with having the right questions and the right process around that, which you can sort of change pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it's true, isn't it? We have a saying that it's not your people, it's your process. And this is what this boils down to, is giving people the tools that enable, the outcome that people want, or the conversion rate in our process to be higher. Because actually, this is there is a skill involved in it. Of course there is. But also, if you've got a process, that becomes the skill. So it enables people, even with zero recruitment experience, if they've got the right script and they've got the right questions, they can get exactly the same outcome as somebody that might have, like us, 20, 25 plus years of recruitment experience, can't it?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Some people are naturally more inquisitive, nosy, whatever you want to call it, and naturally, will ask questions. But the key is really to have it, as you say, Katie, as a process in your business, so that regardless of who is doing that part of the process, you are covering the same things and getting the same outcomes.
Yeah, brilliant. So first of all, let's talk about what would be the classic symptoms or problems that recruitment business owners are facing right now about this topic? How would they know that this is a problem for them?
Yeah, I think one of the things is this sort of this time, perhaps they feel like they're wasting time, or they're investing a lot of energy. They feel like they're doing a really, really good job. They feel like they're working really hard. They're paying people, particularly if you're sort of working in a contingent market, you might be working really, really hard, and then things just aren't happening. So, you know, candidates might be dropping out. You know, clients may be invested in the process and then seem to disappear, backward, counter offers, those sorts of things. And essentially, you've invested lots of time and money and energy in those processes, and you've got nothing, you know, in return. You know, we're talking about, I don't know, Katie, I might be wrong here, but the kind of ratios, average ratios, are about 30 to 40% with contingent recruitment. So that's a whole, you know, 60 to 70% of work that's being done that isn't resulting in you know, money, basically, in placements.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, Kate. I'd say it's lower than that in contingent recruitment. Yeah.
Wow.
It's well, when quite a few of our clients first start working with us, it can be around 10 to 20% that they're actually converting. And the industry average is definitely more likely about 20%, even though people would like to think, I think they'd like to say, oh, we convert about 30%. But you're right, even if it was 30% or 40%, there's a lot that we're leaving on the table there that nothing is happening with. But think of the hours of time and investment and focus that is going into those jobs, going into those clients, that actually isn't yielding any return at all.
Absolutely, it's just it's painful. I would say for people to be doing
it's painful and it's expensive, isn't it? It's blooming costly.
So there's a whole other impact when you sort of not filling those opportunities in terms of morale, motivation within your team, people's perception of you as a business. And so there's a whole host of things that will sort of happen when you know, as a result of these kind of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right, because there's certain frustrations definitely that I know I experienced when I was running, you know, a recruitment business and teams, which would be, you know, you get to that point and somebody said to you, oh yeah, I'm pledging that placement, Katie, you know, that's definitely going to come in this week. I've literally put my mortgage on it. Then all of a sudden, on the final hurdle, it would be like, oh, you know, they've actually got another opportunity. They didn't tell me about it. It'd be like, what? They didn't tell you about it. Did you ask the question? Well, you know, they told me at the beginning there was nothing, you know, when I first spoke to them, but then they didn't keep asking that question throughout the process. And of course, things change. They're talking to their parents, they're talking to their boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, they're talking to their colleagues. Other agencies are talking to them about opportunities. And so all these things are constantly evolving as we're moving through the process. But only if we ask certain questions do we get to hear about it. Because why should a candidate tell us? I mean, it's not their job to tell us, is it?
No, absolutely not. And we're dealing with humans. It's not like an object that stays the same. Things change in people's lives, don't they? Yeah, that from one day to the next, what happens just because they told us one thing, it can be completely different.
Exactly. So what are the other frustrations that, you know, you're hearing or seeing that is coming up for people around it?
I think, and I'd probably just urge people to be aware of this as well, because I think quite often people feel a bit powerless in these situations. So, you know, we hear things around, you know, they can see that opportunity, as I said, they're doing a good job, but they feel that it's out of their control, and not really getting that return. And I think just be conscious of that. You know, are we telling ourselves it's the market? Are we telling ourselves it's the candidates? Are we telling ourselves it's the clients? Because if they're things that people are saying or you're saying to yourself, you know, there are always going to be changes in the market. The market goes up, it goes down, you know, it's candidate driven, it's client driven, it very much depends. But there are things that, you know, those frustrations are real, but there are things you can do, you know, to sort that out.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right, isn't it? Because I hear this quite a lot. It's like, oh, but Katie, it was out of my hands. You know, I couldn't do anything about that. But what we're saying is, and the good news is, we're going to tell you what these are, but that actually that isn't true. you totally do have control, don't you?
Absolutely. I think it is that thing again when we would obviously when we're dealing with people, it does make things more challenging. It's not the same as having a nice, neat little box that you're passing on to someone and it's going to stay the same. But that's even more of a reason to be making sure that the questioning we're using and how we're kind of, working with clients and candidates in that process is very much addressed and kind of you're aware of, I guess.
Mm. And you're right on that, because when I speak to clients, they will often say, well, what can I do? I'm not in their head, or I can't control these people. And they're right, you can't necessarily control somebody, but you can control the information that you're extracting from that individual.
Yeah.
And you can control the knowledge that you have around that candidate, and the depth of knowledge that you have around that candidate and their circumstances, and that scenario and how that is playing out for them. And the only way that you can do that is by asking really effective questions, isn't it?
Yeah, and I also think, asking really great questions builds rapport as well with these people. So then they're more likely to hand over information willingly because they feel they've got that connection and that you understand them and that you're interested. You're not just talking at them, you are actually listening and asking them questions that kind of like show that you actually care and you really want to do a good job for both clients and candidates. And that ultimately will build rapport anyway. People will, find you more credible because they think, oh gosh, they're really, really interested, rather than just extracting some information about a job description or their CV that's, not really getting under the skin of it. So I think it's the information, but it's also the other intangibles around that rapport, credibility, professionalism. It builds all of those things within your business as well, having good questioning.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? And I used to say, I used to speak to my guys and say, well, how long do you actually spend? Like, think about it. For somebody who's entrusting their career with you, which is as important to people, isn't it? It's like the job that you do for 90% of your life, your working day, your day. You're spending all that time with it. You want to find the right job for you. It's your passion. It's your purpose. Like, it's, apart from getting married, buying houses, it's up there, isn't it? It's very, very high on that list of importance to us. And so if somebody is having a quick conversation with us and asking us service questions, like you're saying, that kind of surface level, they're not digging underneath us to, well, what is it that's important to me? Why do I want that type of job? Why do I want to work in that type of location? What kind of boss do I want? What else is important to me? Like, what am I going to work for? But what am I doing with that money outside of work? Because that also motivates me and drives me. So if I'm talking to a recruitment consultant and they spend, I don't know, half an hour just finding out a bit about me, then start briefing me on a job, and then ask me a few questions, send me to an interview, ask me a couple of questions on the way back, then put an offer to me, I've probably spent maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours on the phone to them out of my lifetime.
Yeah. It's not
realistically, it's not a lot, is it?
No.
And yet we're expecting them to tell us all the things that we know that we need to know, but does the candidate actually know that they need to tell us that?
And I think as well, spending that time at the front of the end of the process ultimately saves you time later on. Because if you think to those contingent numbers, that 10, 20%, how much of your time wasted in that process, where if you're investing more time up front, I think it does save an awful lot of time down the line in terms of things going wrong. 100%.
100%. You're absolutely right. You've got to take control from the outset. The moment you do that registration interview, you have to take control and then maintain that control the whole way through the process. And I'm using the word control just to be clear for people listening. I don't mean like, you got to control everything. But this is about being, you're that surgeon, you're that expert. If somebody is coming to you for you to support them to get that new job, that new career move, they need to feel as though you are that expert and you absolutely know what you're talking about, and that you're helping them, you're moving them through the process in a way that's seamless and easy for them, not that's clunky, or that they're not sharing all the information with you. So that you're right, that whole rapport and relationship building and so on is so important in that process, isn't it?
And and loyalty. That's another thing we missed. If
Mm,
someone spends time with you, you would feel a sense of loyalty, I think, more so than someone who, you don't. I mean, quite often, I was often surprised, a lot of candidates don't even know which agency it was that placed them, do they? A lot of the time,
mhm.
if they've not had that kind of relationship, an ongoing relationship, and built that rapport, quite often they don't even remember who it was a few months later.
Yeah, which says quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah,
If that is the case.
exactly.
So, all right. So let's talk solutions then. What can be done here? What are we
Yeah,
talking about here?
I think,
What do we need to
yeah,
put in place?
definitely, yeah. So I think there's the key thing here is we really, really need to get clear on kind of looking at in your business, where are things potentially creating friction, where are the problems. So, for example, you mentioned that client, Katie, that you spoke with this morning. So they may be getting people who are giving backward at at the last minute. So they're going through the whole process, and at the end of it, they're giving backward. So they may feel like, oh, it's just candidates. There's lots of opportunities around for them. It's out of our control. We can't really do anything about it. So what we need to do, what I would advise, I think is a really good exercise for anyone to sort of do, is if you're a solo recruiter or if you've got a team, it'd be a great team exercise to do, is to really plot out the journey that you have with your candidates and your clients and see where we can stop these things happening, where we can alleviate them, what are the questions that we need to be asking at each point in that process, to really nail down, how can we be instrumental in controlling this situation and preventing it from happening. We were talking about this, weren't we, Katie, about it being like a game of chess, which I'm rubbish at, by the way. But it's very strategic in terms of, I always think like you need to be one step ahead of what problem might happen, and it won't be a surprise. So how can you be that one step ahead of the possibilities that are out there? And if you've worked in recruitment, you know pretty much what those possibilities within reason are going to be. So we'll probably just take the candidate journey as an example. So what I would do is I would spend some time with your team and work through every single sort of touch point in that candidate journey of getting a job, and where can you alleviate this particular problem. So I would sort of brainstorm, or better still, use data to identify exactly what's happening. So if you've lost, I don't know, 10 opportunities in the last month, what has been the specific reasons for those, and make a list of all of those reasons from a candidate perspective and then a client perspective. So once you've got your list, for example, this client who's sort of saying that candidates keep giving backward at the last minute, we want to look at, right, in the process, what are we doing to ensure that that doesn't happen? So I would start with, what is your first touch point with your candidate? So if your first touch point is, you've identified them as a candidate, however that is, you've got their CV, and you do a pre-registration or whatever you call that, literally make a list of all the questions, and what are those questions you're asking, and what questions could you be asking to stop this happening further down the line. So there would be things around you wanting to make sure that you've got real clarity on the motivators, the buying motivators of your candidates. So often we think about this from a client perspective, but what are the buying motivators of your candidates? And I would say this is something that really does get missed. Would you agree, Katie? Like, people kind of miss this. So quite often we're so busy wanting to know about their experience and can they do this job? Am I going to fill this position with this candidate? Have they got the right experience? But we don't actually find out about what motivates that person. I'll just give you a quick example. It's a very long time ago, but when I first started in recruitment, my desk that I had was, I just placed accounts clerks that were earning less than 12 grand, which does show how long I've been in recruitment, but they were earning less than 12 grand. So as you can imagine, their CVs weren't particularly detailed. They didn't have loads of experience that I could draw on. But what was really, really important was I knew their dog's name, I knew their mum's name, I knew none of them had cars, so I knew which bus routes got them to which jobs. I knew what they liked doing at the weekend, so that I knew what their motivators were for getting a job. What was the study package, because most of them were studying. So all of these things I knew inside out, so that I knew what their buying motivators were. So if I knew, I would ask them, what's your priority? Is it being 10 minutes from home? As an example, it's quite a basic example, but and if I knew being close to home was their number one, motivator, I would be addressing that the whole way through the process and making sure that I was talking about that the whole way through. And if other jobs had come up, how far away was that on the bus? What was, so I was constantly making sure that I knew what their motivators were and how that affected the process. So I would literally start off with, right, what are you asking in that first interview? What's important to them about the job that they get? If they had to put it in order, if this because very rarely is it money. We think it's money, but very rarely is it money.
Yeah.
So what are the, and how does that relate to the job that you are offering them? And make questions that are in relation to understanding the motivators of that candidate. And then the next stage, maybe you're putting their CV forward. So you're doing some pre-interview prep work with them. Do we know what other interviews they've got going on? As you said, Katie, it's not just asking them at the beginning, what other interviews have they got going on? Because that changes daily. Who else are they speaking to? What is it they like about those opportunities? What's their preference? What are they going to do when they get counter-offered? And this is another thing. It's not just asking, oh, do you think you'll get counter-offered? Assume they will. What are they going to do? And talk to them up front about that. Well, everyone gets counter-offered. You're nothing special type thing. What are you going to do when that happens? And sowing that seed that this is something that's going to happen. All employers want to keep you because, they don't want to lose you. It costs them 10 grand to recruit someone to replace you. So you're going to get counter-offered. Throw some stats, I don't know, 60% of people who are counter-offered, I don't know what the true is now, but within a year are looking for another job. So all of these things you want to be weaving in. And literally I would plot out, you could use some sticky note post-its for each part of the process, and then list what those problems might be that arise, and then what are the questions you need to ask to make sure that you're avoiding as much as possible the negative outcome that's been happening in your business. So I think that's a really good exercise to get that control. And obviously, once you've done that, you can then implement that as a process in your business so that everyone, regardless of how natural they are at asking questions or how intuitive they are, how nosy they are, everyone has that same process so that you can guarantee you are doing everything in your control to minimize the impact of that happening.
Yeah. Absolutely. We used to have a question that literally was sort of on our desks, which would be, what is going to stop this placement from happening?
Yeah.
And that was a question that we had on our screens. And then what it meant was that game of chess is such a good example, analogy, Kate. I used to use it all the time. Guys, you've got to get good at this. We have to be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. What's the candidate going to play out? What's the client going to play out? And what is going to stop this placement from happening? So once you ask yourself that question in your head, you go, oh, okay, well, this might happen. Brilliant. Okay, so what question am I going to ask my client or my candidate to make sure that I know the answer to that? What's something else that might stop it from happening? Okay, this might. Okay, so what do I need to, for example, like let's say, what could stop this placement from happening? My candidate gets counter-offered. Great.
Yeah.
Have I asked the counter-offer question? Have I actually tested that with my candidate? Like you're saying, future pace it. Okay, so you're handing in your notice. You're going to go in there tomorrow. You're going to speak to your manager, and straight away they're going to tell you they're going to offer you 10 more grand. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And role play it with them.
Yeah. Oh. And then when it happens, you can remind them of the conversation you've had. Look, well, John, we knew this was going to happen, didn't we? Remember what you said, that, even if you were counter-offered, it's not going to change the fact that you've got no personal growth, which is what's really important to you. So you repeating that. I think sometimes we avoid asking questions because we're scared of the answers. And so people think, well, it's okay, I'll pretend. It's almost like sort of brushing it under the carpet of like, well, I've got them on an interview. let's just pray everything kind of works out. But you can have quite direct conversations then, can't you, around counter offers if you've never had those full discussions. And I think, look, when people are offered, using that example, money, it is a huge boost to their ego. Everyone likes to be made to feel, you know, special and important. But if you've been asking those questions and having those discussions, it just minimizes the actual impact of that, and, you know, takes them to a moment where they weren't emotionally, you know, their ego wasn't being massaged, they, you know, when they were thinking logically about it.
You're absolutely right, because if somebody thinks, oh, it's just going to happen anyway, and then when the manager asks, you know, says that to them, it's a bit like, oh, well, it was going to happen. And, oh, well, they said I'd get counter offered by 10 grand. You've only offered me 2. Well, that's not very good. Then they can't value me that much, you know. Oh, well, there we are, you know, and you're absolutely right. So you role play it through. And the other thing that we haven't talked about here, which is absolutely critical, isn't it, when you're asking these questions, is to know, because you talked about motivators, and very often there's influencers in the actual decision making process that we're not aware of. Like, for example, you know, if I was going to change my job, I've got my husband, and I would be asking his advice. Now, I wouldn't, whether I take it or not, but I would definitely, you know, I would definitely ask him. But there's other people out there who would actually go by, if they're very influenced by external peers or you know, trusted advisors, that will say, oh, but you know, that person said X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to take that into account in my decision making process. So we do need to know, you know, what would your partner say about this? What does your partner think you should do? Which job does your partner think you should take? You know, how do they feel about that? How do they feel about you traveling 45 minutes a day? How do they feel about you doing X, Y, and Z? So we literally need to know somebody's, you know, bra size, you know, an internal leg measurement, don't we? We have to know the details of these people if we're really going to support them at the right depth that we want to make sure they make the right decision.
And that's where that example I gave when I did that junior desk was, most people were quite young, so I knew that their parents most likely would be influencing them. So I used to phone and chat to their mum and dad. You know, I'd phone up at a time when they weren't there, chat to mum and dad. They knew me by name. They knew, you know, these are my hot candidates. And also they built, you know, trust with me, because I genuinely wanted to find them the thing that was in line with their motivators. And so I think when those influencers know that person as well, or know of them, or, you know, have got a good impression, it does make a difference.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're absolutely right, Kate. So let's just recap them for our listeners. So what you're talking about here is a step-by-step process of what they need to do. Now, so if I'm a manager in a business, what do I need to go away and put into place?
I would look at the facts and figures. So, because quite often when we speak to people in our team, if we've got people in our team, they will be sort of saying, oh, well, I didn't know, you know, and as you'd said, Katie, just previously, and this was one of the biggest, I always remember it when I started in recruitment, of my director once saying to me, well, did you ask them? I'll have said something like, oh, you know, they didn't turn up for the second interview because they had another interview, but they didn't tell me. Well, did you ask them? And I think that is such a good thing to keep in everyone's mind in your team. But yeah, I would go away and I would look at the facts and figures. So what are the problems? Identify them based on facts rather than what people have told you, and really, really look at, like, where are things in the process falling through? You know, what is it that's going wrong? You know, we've talked a lot about candidates. What about the client side as well? So where are those challenges, and what's going wrong? And I would literally, you know, make a list of those and then probably brainstorm them with your team. It's a great thing, you know, you can do together. You can do it on Zoom if you're sort of not in an office together, or it's all virtual. You know, get some post-it notes and literally brainstorm all of these problems. And then what I would do is I would then go through every single step of where you have a touch point, or where there needs to be a touch point with that candidate that can influence and potentially change the outcome. So what, you know, pre-registration is you know, people may have different names for that, but what is your process for that? Are you asking these questions that we've talked through? And as you said, Katie, we're going to give them some questions, some sort of gold nuggets, but what are the questions that you're asking? Are you asking just about their job? You know, or are you getting more in detail in the things we've talked about, sorry, that, you know, get under the skin of the motivators? Are we clear on, you know, what is it that that candidate really, really wants? What is it that that client really wants? What's really important to them when they're choosing a candidate? You know, quite often you may hear from a client perspective something along the lines, oh, well, I went for the candidate that wasn't, you know, didn't have as much experience, but they told me they needed X, Y, and Z. Well, are we asking questions like, okay, so if Mr. Client, I didn't have someone with X, Y, and Z, but I did have, there were more, you know, what is it that they really, really want? Because often a job description is just, you know, it doesn't identify that. We need to ask those questions. So I would literally map out your process of every touch point with your candidate and client, and where could this go wrong, and what are the questions that you need to be asking, and how do you then put that into a process that everyone follows, whether you have that as a script, a crib sheet, a process. So, you know, do you have it that, you know, before everyone goes for an interview, you're having a scheduled call, and is there a set of questions, not just what people think they should ask, but have you got within your business questions that will alleviate these problems happening later on? Are we consistently asking them about what interviews they've been on? You know, what else is going on in their life that might sort of change the outcome? Are we consistently asking that? Because things change. Just because we asked at the beginning, you know, they could have been called about an interview an hour after you spoke to them and have something else.
Yeah.
And I think
100%.
We make assumptions, and that's where things go wrong. Literally mapping out every stage, what are the problems that could happen, and then what are the questions that need to be asked?
Yeah. And on that, I'm going to give another gold nugget, which was something that I was taught, and honestly, totally changed the way I approached every conversation. This is about, like you're saying, Kate, about every time you speak to the candidate or you speak to the client, I used to ask this question, which is, what's changed since we last spoke?
Brilliant.
What has changed since we last spoke? And that question alone just prompts that candidate to tell you about something like you just said, like, well, an agency's just called me about this other job, or, oh, well, I had a conversation with my other partner and now I'm not sure about it. So that's the first question that I ask. You always want to recap. What's changed since we last spoke? How are you feeling about things now? Are you feeling any different? Anything else that's come up for you? So you ask those questions first. You gather the information before you match back, and it's you know, it's some basic selling, but it's absolutely, it will change the results that you get. And as Kate and I have said, we are going to give you, so we've got a giveaway at the end of this session. There'll be a link for you that you can click on, and there'll be our top 10 questions that you can be asking, control questions that you can be asking your candidates specifically for this process. So, Kate, thank you so much for that. What a great session. Really practical, really effective for people. If you have liked this episode, please do give us a little review. We would really appreciate that. And if you want our roadmap for building a 7-figure, £1 million plus recruitment business, click on the link below as well, and you can get access to that. So, Kate, thanks for joining us today. And we will see you again soon.
See you all later. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.